Welcome to my live session while I go through Hudu's Q&A or AMA and answer the questions. I'm just going through one by one right now, and then we'll dive into some of the other more specific things about Hudu, or if you have questions, we can talk about that as well. But I just want to cover whatever's been posted currently. But in this case, the AMA was meant to only be online on Reddit, and then I decided to do it last minute as a live webinar, and so here we are. Question from IT Hero: what things does Hudu not do as well? How easy is the migration? And since I've presumably helped other MSPs with the migration, what have we heard from post-migration after that? So in this case, I tried writing a response and Reddit did not like it. So I posted it into a document in Hudu and then shared that link. But basically, the migration itself is very easy. We have a number one. The first thing that you have to know is that it does rely on the IT-Glue API. So if you don't have the IT-Glue API enabled because you're running on a or like a lighter plan, there was a period in time where the API was included in all plans, and then shortly after Kaseya, the API became a higher plan only option, and older organizations were opted in. Like if you had enabled the API first, then you were opted in and you kept it. But if you did not, then you're basically out of luck until you upgrade. But essentially, there's two modules that we use for this. One is the Hudu API module, which gets used to it allows PowerShell to connect to Hudu directly, and then the other one is the IT-Glue PowerShell module, which I think Luke Whitelock had to redo with a version 2. So if we look at here, there's the IT-Glue API v2 module. So these two modules get used for the migration essentially, and then we have a script that's IT-Glue Hudu migration script right here, which gets used. It uses both of these modules to then go through and perform the migration. So as far as the question regarding how easy is the migration, which is right here, it's pretty easy. You just run this script. Essentially, you download the zip file, you extract it, and then you run the IT-Glue Hudu migration command here. And then there's directions and there's instructions inside this post. We can see here's a step-by-step walkthrough on how to do it, preparation, and running the actual script. So it looks like a lot. There's a lot of instructions. There's a lot of things to do that can go wrong that you can use to clean up. But essentially, it is pretty easy. And we've basically done, now we can do like a typical IT-Glue migration for the most part can be done in about 2 to 4 hours usually. So it's pretty easy. Now, there are some things that you want to know going in, so I've highlighted them in that question. Like number one, it generates log files. Like there will be log files for every entity it gets processed. You want to make sure that you keep those files for as long as the migration is up in the air. I would say maybe even up to a year once you're done, as you can use those log files to basically recreate anything or map IT-Glue back to Hudu for any reason, because it builds a mapping automatically of entity to entity of the IDs, so you can use that. What have I heard post-migration? I've helped other MSPs. Yes, I have. There's a document here. It's the same document I brought up earlier that talks about different things that can go wrong and what to keep in mind. It talks about the script and running it, and then what to do afterwards when items are missing, and how to handle file attachments, and so on and so forth. So a lot of that is already covered in that document. There's a couple other things that may not have made it to the document necessarily that we've discovered over the way through doing multiple migrations. So number one, people still don't realize like passwords, TOTP, those things come across without a problem. Since IT-Glue added the TOTP seed to the passwords export, like we can populate Hudu with that without a problem, and the migration script does that automatically. Some of the other things that we called out here. Like ITglue has essentially configurations that are different than the flexible assets, right? Like the equivalent of a flexible asset in ITglue is an asset layout in Hudu. And ITglue has an additional core asset called a configuration. And those configurations have like interfaces that currently doesn't have an equivalent in Hudu. But the key thing is like in order to pull those configuration interfaces, like if I pull up, let's see, the ITglue API reference document here, right? So in order to get the configuration interfaces, we have to query every configuration this endpoint, and then it'll list essentially the interfaces that come down, and potentially we actually have to pull the specific one instead of just indexing, potentially, depending on what data you want to bring in. And then we have to essentially create a wraparound to rebuild those interfaces. So right now that doesn't happen. It has the potential to increase your migration time significantly if you have like 1,000 configurations and each one has 2 or 3 interfaces. You have to index all of them, and then essentially create or update the asset in Hudu with that. We would have to basically add the amount of time it would take to hit the ITglue API, loop through that, and then rebuild it and push it to Hudu. So it does have a significant load time on there, but right now it's not included in the script. The other flip side of that is it can be done after the fact, right? Because like I mentioned with the logs, once you're live and cut over to Hudu, as long as the ITglue data is still there, you can go back after the fact, run a secondary script to query everything from ITglue and populate Hudu with it. Images that may not come in, this is mostly ITglue's fault. There was a situation, early days of the script, I guess. I don't know if it's really can be considered early days because it was a significant time, but in the early days of the script, there was a limitation on Hudu's API where we weren't able to put a image into the correct location on Hudu. And so like the workaround was for Luke's script, it was to base64 encode the actual image file. And so your documents would like blow up with the size of the actual image in text format, which is ridiculous. You know, like a 2 meg image can really easily become like a 10 or 15 megabyte image at that point. And so that was causing problems because the Hudu database would just blow up, and any kind of revision that would happen, you know, the database would just, the auditing would retain it, and the actual file would retain it, and you would use a significant amount of space on your drive. So if you are someone who's migrated earlier, like back in the day, you may have this problem with performance and with your disk space running out. Inside the migration thing I'm looking for right now, but it doesn't look like, it looks like I closed it. So inside the migration script, we actually have another script that we created that'll replace the Hudu base64 images, and that'll clean up your database. It'll run through your articles and convert them to actual images utilizing a newer, it's not really new anymore, but a newer API endpoint to push those images to your either backend storage, whatever that is, like your local drive or your S3 object storage. And so then that just replaces the URL pointing to that correct location, and it decreases the size of your article significantly. And then after that, you just clean up your records table, I think is where the auditing goes. But aside from that, like that was the only issue Hudu side. With ITglue side, the problem with this is that you might not even get the image out of the export. Right, and so we have that called out here. ITglue exports the images 3 different ways, and sometimes it doesn't do it at all. And so the PowerShell script we do tries to handle this as much as possible, but you may end up with broken inline images, and it's just a matter of tracking them down or just determining that you don't need those images and letting them die at the time. But for the most part, we have pretty good success with it. We probably get like 85–90% of the images come through properly, usually. Relationships are, again, similar to interfaces, are not easily discernible from ITglue's API. In some cases, they'll be inferred and they'll be listed alongside it, and we can build it as we go. In other cases, it can't be. And since this is a little bit more critical than the interfaces usually, we have built out a script here to add the missing relations here, essentially. So we would go through and we would grab each of those items that we've matched, that we've found, configurations, articles, assets, locations, and so on. And then we basically build out a loop. We loop through the ITglue configurations, assets, passwords, and grab the relations, which we have to loop over each individual object to do that. And then once we have that, we can go ahead and grab those related things, and then we can fall back into using our document here on how to add our relations right here, relations equals, relations to create, and we would just cycle through creating that command to run through that. Other than that, as the relationships come out pretty well, and we don't really have anything missing once we're done with that. URL rewrites is another thing that could potentially go wrong. A lot of concerns are like, well, people have been posting direct IT glue links in articles or in assets or whatever. In reality, the IT glue URLs are pretty much all the same format. Starting with the base domain, base website / organization ID / some sort of entity / ID number. So we can break up the URL pretty well using regex, and we do that to basically reverse engineer which IT glue entity that URL is talking about. Once we do reverse engineer that entity, we can then link it back using the migration logs. We can link back the ID number to Hudu, and we literally go back and replace the URL in the middle of the HTML. So anywhere there's HTML, we check rich text fields on asset layouts, we check plain text fields on notes, we check the company fields, like the company notes field, and we check any document as well. Anywhere there's a URL to IT glue, if we can match it to a Hudu ID, we rip out the URL and replace it with the correct Hudu URL. And it does it really well. We have pretty good success with that. The only issues would come up with if you have like a custom branded IT glue URL, as well as a default canned IT glue URL. And so in that case, we're only doing one at a time. We do have something in the works that at some point we'll get back to be able to parse more than one URL using regex, but right now it's just one. And so you may just have to run that more than once your migration's finished. But again, it's pretty easy to clean up once you have the idea of how it works. And you can do it after migration as well. Like, it doesn't matter. We don't need IT glue after that. We just need the logs from the migration. The rest of these things are not really exposed. Process checklist doesn't really have a API, or currently, I think Hudu has an API to create processes and task lists under process now, under I think the latest version, but IT glue doesn't expose them. So we don't have any way of migrating that currently, as far as I know. And then SSL certificates are the same thing. Like, IT glue exposes websites on their API. And so they've got, let's see, somewhere here, they've got domains. So we can pull like a list of websites and domains that have been added to IT glue that we can recreate into Hudu. But just looking through here again, just to make sure I'm not lying, but I don't see, there's no certificates. So there's no way to grab like the SSL certificates or anything like that that are listed. And, on the flip side, Hudu doesn't actually have that same functionality built in as well. Hudu doesn't have the SSL verifier or monitor that IT glue has. And so that's one of the shortcomings. One of the questions is what is that Hudu what doesn't Hudu have that IT glue does have? And that's like the SSL monitor and alerting for those certificates. But with that being said, John Dupre, before he went full-time Cybertrain, has created a Hudu certificate bot that'll basically do that monitoring for you. You create an asset layout, you record all the details, and it'll run an Azure function that runs on a schedule, validating the certificate and creating the ticket or alerts when it comes up for renewal at that point. So there is a community solution to basically bring back that missing functionality currently. IT glue has the ability to upload documents. They give you basically like their own SharePoint. And so you can host Office documents like Word, Excel, and PDFs directly out of the knowledge base section in IT glue. Those files will be included in the export, but Hudu doesn't have an equivalent right now. And so we're going to, like, the way the export shows up, it creates a blank HTML file, and then it adds it as an attachment. There's an attachment folder with that file that you've uploaded included in that folder, linked to that blank document. So we just basically do that. We create the blank document in Hudu, and then we attach that file into that blank document for the migration. As far as that, like, the question was, what does Hudu do, but not necessarily as well as IT glue? That's a hard question to answer. It's going to be very dependent on how you've been using IT-Glue. A lot of it is going to be based off personal preference and what you like things to be done. And that's basically the short answer for that. But yeah, that's all just to answer this one question that this guy asked. 3 different questions technically in that one. And again, the question itself was too long to post back into Reddit, so I just included a public link to that document in my response here. This person, Stephanie, was looking for a similar answer, same follow-up, same answer there. Are there any plans to integrate AI more into the product? Oh, this is a fun question. I don't know because I'm not from product, but there are some good ideas here. Some of the things that I have done are similar to this. I don't know if you know this, but ChatGPT has the ability to you can create your own ChatGPT basically, and so when you do that, let me see if I can bring this over. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, so you have the ability to create your own ChatGPT here, basically, and what you can do is you can actually tie this into actual code, right? So you can come in here and you can tell it to do actual functions, which I have not done in quite a while. Let's see if I remember how to do this. Yeah, you can create a new action here, and the authentication will just be an API key. Your API key will be whatever. Your custom header is going to be X API key, right? And so you can literally tie it into Hudu at this point. If I were to jump into a demo Hudu that I have, and I will just do this live really quickly. It has that article saved. That's funny. Okay, so I can go to admin and jump to API keys. We'll just generate a new. Clearly, I do this a lot. And we're just gonna allow it to do that. Yeah, and we'll copy that key. Right, so that API key can be used to then connect to Hudu at this point, which we can provide. Here's some examples of different actions that it can do, right? Like, so we can say get company list from here. We don't really care about the description, but the server is going to be demo.hosted.docs.io, right? I think, yeah. And so then we can pull up the API documentation and literally create, essentially, if I want to pull companies, I said, right? So get a list of companies, I can basically create this API endpoint inside of ChatGPT so that it can then, I can ask it questions and do stuff, right? So here, if I did, this is API v1, and then this would be companies, and this would be a get temperature, let's see, get companies from Hudu, and operation ID would be get Hudu companies. Parameters, now we can add in like some of these parameters if we want to, like a page number, page size, a name, we can filter a name here, so we can add that in. Let's go here. The name location would be name, in would be query, and here will be like a name of the company to search for, or something like that. It requires not true, it's false, let's say, and it's going to be a string. It's not deprecated, component schema, right? And so now we have this get Hudu companies, and I can just test that really quickly, and it's going to go ahead and try to call. Do you want to allow this call out? Allow it, and it's going to come back with a list of companies. It's trying to search for tech solutions, but I can say, give me a list of all companies from Hudu, and it should do. Allow that. There we go. Rising Tide, demo company, demo one, right? So like, again, I'm not building out a full ChatGPT here that you guys can use necessarily, and I'm not keeping this API key active. The point of this was that we can build out an AI engine that can pull details from Hudu. Here's the companies: Acorn, Demo, Freston, Mendy, other Rising Tide, Terra. Like, and looking at this, we can see that, and we can do something like, which company do you think has the most fun, right? And we can just use contextual knowledge of the names of the companies, right? Looks like Terry's Chocolates and Freston Cakes is right. So like, you basically have an AI assistant talking to Hudu at this point. And I did it in under 10 minutes, give or take. So I don't know what Hudu has planned for, but there's a lot of stuff you can already do with the API that's pretty cool, pretty awesome. And the only thing is, like, I have to kind of answer this on Hudu, on Reddit as well. So if I come here and I'm just going to reply back, Hudu team to answer. Bunch of things you can already do. Demonstrated. All right, so that's that answer. Let's see what else. So that's this guy who asked about AI. We just collapse these as I go. Right, that one's been answered already. Okay. No, this is an easy answer. I'm not interested in taking on more work. I have too much already. I forgot Reddit doesn't like emojis. All right. What are some ideas you have done for integrating Roost with Hudu? That's an interesting question, because there's just so much that's like walking into a candy store and be like, you can pick any candy you want, but you can only have like one or two of them. Which ones would you want to pick, right? Like, there are so many things you can do. That, especially as Hudu continues to add functionality, like it doesn't actually ever stop. And so let's just pick a couple examples. The question itself will like generate ideas that I've never thought of before until someone asked, and so like that's part of the problem as well. And capabilities change. From boring to cool. Okay, so for example, let's switch to doing like a list. Whoa. Automatic, I cannot type. Automatic documentation of BitLocker keys. Hudu in Halo or other PSAs. Integrating Hudu back on itself to build out templates, templated articles, processes to establish global versus per client overrides. HTML hidden comments in the article or process to identify a find replace, so you can leave the client overrides alone when you rewrite the document or whatever. Some other cool ideas potentially would be, let's see, what else? I mean, so like one of the features that Halo PSA has is the ability to tie in Azure AI search to the KB vectorization, so it can match articles to tickets for the technicians, but also for the clients to be used in a chatbot, etc. Having a synchronization of articles, synchronization of articles between Hudu and Halo would be cool to allow that functionality while maintaining the power and of the Hudu KB. Yeah, because Halo's KB side is not great, honestly. I mean, again, there's some more ideas that you can honestly just think about any challenge that you have. One of the things I love doing with integrations and automation is tying systems back on themselves to basically enhance functionality and features of the platform. And so since Roost is basically an AI engine or a scripting engine that's, completely able to do whatever you want, it's very powerful and like the ideas are nonstop. Here it says it's a problem migrating from ITglue, all due to Hudu's import limitation. I recall looking for in my former MSP. So it sounds like here that you were looking for, this person's looking at the built-in import process, which honestly, I've never used before. Let me kill my API key real quick. I don't want that being used from anyone watching. But yeah, I mean, there's an import process here, import data that exists. And I think this is what you're probably using in that, the person who's asking that question. And I honestly have never used it here because it's not like there's no certain types of data. They're structured in like more dimensions than you can fit onto an Excel spreadsheet. And so one of the trying to get that data into an Excel document that you then import can be pretty difficult. And when using a PowerShell object, like you have all those dimensions available to you. So the ITglue Hudu migration script is the only way I've ever tried doing it. It's the only way I'd want to try doing it. And if you're on ITglue and you don't have access to the API, my response is going to be to upgrade, get access to the API temporarily, do the migration, and then get off of it, or find some other way to pull the information. I mean, at that point, the only thing you get out of ITglue is a spreadsheet already. And so then it's just a matter of cleaning up the formatting, which you can do manually and then use those import methods. I don't know of any limitations there, but you could also just use PowerShell at that time and just parse it all from PowerShell and use the API directly, which does not have any limitation. I've done very large migrations of ITglue, thousands of companies and hundreds of thousands of asset layouts or assets into asset layouts without, I can't say without a problem, but it wasn't a size limitation. It was mostly a data problem limitation where the data just wasn't clean and we actually didn't need as much as we were bringing in or things like that. The amount of time it took was not long enough, was not short enough to fit within the time period or whatever. So let me close that one. It's going to get confusing. And let me just reply here. From ITglue, and I posted a link to a response. Right, and again, this is the same person who asked again up above. We already answered that one, so we can move on from there. A few questions. Any Explain like M5 guide to using PowerShell modules and API, or why you might use. Will content be updated here or elsewhere? Regarding documentation quality scores, any way to differentiate clients from managed, unmanaged in relation to the overall scores? And is there a gold standard repository others could look to model their templates documentation structure? We went at it blind, and I think, like you've mentioned in videos, made changes on the fly / redid a bit of work when implementing. Yeah, I mean, this is part of one of the hardest things. Let's break this up into 3 separate questions here real quick. I mean, honestly, this is not an easy question to answer. It's not because it's a hard answer, mostly just because, I mean, if I have to explain the benefits behind programming, automation, and API and PowerShell, then we're already very far behind. So it's not like an explain like I'm 5. It's more like explain like I'm 1 or something like that. So you need to get a little bit more mature there on your use of automation and PowerShell before we can have that conversation necessarily. So that's this question. Let's break this up into a couple of things here. That's one. Is there a gold standard? And then, yeah, those are the different questions. So let's do the following. Come on. There we go. Use that one. And independently, if I can spell that correctly. So this is the first question. This was the second question, which we can quote as well. And then this is the next one, which we'll quote. And then we will make that one a quote as well. We'll just go through and answer these. So I'm not really sure what content they're talking about here, but MSVP.io's Luke blog that is run solely by him. Community contributed. Right, and then here, I think native, so what he's talking about is like built into the platform. There's like documentation quality. And so you may want to know how good your documentation is, but you may not care about it for like a break fix client versus an MSP client, right? And so like under the companies, you can essentially build a type where you can define who those clients are, but under the documentation quality, you don't really know which one is which. There's no breakout here of which client is which type. And so no is the short answer to his question regarding breaking it up. Right, but there's no way natively to break this up. But at the same time, I think let's just check the API real quick. There may be something that you can dashboard on, and then if you can pull that information and then break it up by type on a dashboard, then you can do that. Let's see if we have. I guess it's not here. Right, we've got relationship with users, websites. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, you can build your own standard for documentation to determine like what you expect. The documentation quality is not super complicated. It's looking to validate how much of your assets are populated, basically. And so you can just you can pull a list of assets, group by asset type, group by company type, and build your own scoring system. Displayed in like in Grafana, a dashboarding platform and something like that, which does have the ability to make API calls, right? So you can pass in the API key, similar to what I showed you with OpenAI, and then you can build your own queries and metrics at that point. So we're just gonna write that back. Simple formula that calculates, or just that looks at the number of assets that are entered per asset type. Well-documented client. Group by asset type, group by company, group by company type. A weighted score based off of number of assets per type. That's basically it. And then finally here again, there's no current gold standard repository that I'm aware of, at least. Repository. I think there were conversations from Hudu about having one at some point. I mean, I wanted to do one. I technically have one. It's just not really built out. This is what we're in right now. This demo RT hosted docs.io is meant to be used as a public Hudu that everyone has a read-only login for. Right, so demo hosted docs.io would be a public username and password that everyone can log into to then explore the build out of the Hudu to see how I've done certain things, and so that way you can like come up with ideas on how to build your own Hudu and things like that. But since it is a pet project and not a paid project, it has more or less fallen behind, and there's not a lot built out for it to be ready to be made public, so to speak. But we do have in here like documentation standards, examples of this is where the Reddit response actually is, right? That I linked earlier. And we have like some ideas. Here's a ChatGPT article that was created by ChatGPT using the AI integration that's built in. Here's some example documents. This is one I actively continuously share and give out to my clients when I'm doing a Halo consulting. It was mostly formed, again, to demonstrate the usage of the Hudu knowledge base system, and like how it looks when it's on a public document versus a internal view with a different, jumping through different headers and whatnot. But as I wrote it, I needed something to write about, and so I picked the Halo statuses, and it turned out that it's actually useful. People like reading it and using it as a baseline. So I'm in the middle of semi-working on building out essentially a public Hudu that can be used as a reference. but as of right now, as far as I know, there isn't a public one, um, or an available repository to go to. There are some built into the platform, right? If we go to asset layouts, for example, we can build a layout from, oops, wrong button, from a template here. But again, like they're not, like it's going to be very hard to get a template that works for everyone, right? Some of this actually ties into the next thing that I'm going to talk about that they bring up, and like they went in blind, and they end up making changes and stuff like that. Documentation is going to be a journey, and actually it's one of the things that on one of my videos on my channel, I talk about that documentation is actually something I dislike a lot. It's like a necessary evil, because the moment that you write that document and you hit save, it becomes stale at that point. And it just starts collecting dust. It's no longer going to be accurate necessarily. The longer it goes on, the less likely it's going to be helpful. But also because a lot of times the document is written in a way that essentially trains the technician to be lazy, where they stop thinking and they just start following the directions, and then when it doesn't work, they get stuck. But without going down that tangent, one of the things that you want to consider when you do documentation, because it is something that you have to do regardless, is how is it going to be used, right? When is it going to be important? You don't need to know, the available storage space on your hard drive inside your documentation platform. It doesn't do you any good. It's going to be in your RMM anyways, and it's something that changes day to day, literally. There's no way you're keeping that updated, fast enough or often enough for it to be important. And when you're working on the machine, looking at the drive space, you're going to be looking at the machine. You're not looking in your documentation to see how much space is available. So there's going to be a lot of pieces of data that are like that are not important to be in the documentation platform, but people spend a lot of time getting in anyways. And if it's something that, like, if all hell breaks out and the only thing you have access to is your documentation platform, what information do you need to get back and start functioning again? And that's really what the base metric you want to start from, to start building out the minimum amount of information that you need. And yeah, it is going to take a couple random passes through to make sure that you're collecting everything and updating and stuff like that. But the bottom line is that's how it goes, right? Like, the more time you spend documenting, the less time you're doing other things on. It's basically time wasted. And especially when you start documenting the minutia, those change very easily. And then your documentation is out of date. It's not helpful anyways. So you really want to be very, very intentional with what you are documenting and how you're designing that. And yes, expect to come back and revisit more than one time. But that's about the best that I can give you. Like, any kind of gold standard repository that we're talking about, it would give you an idea of how to use the platform. It wouldn't necessarily be this is how you should set up your Hudu. These are the things you should be documenting, because it's going to be very, very specific to your MSP or to your use case, even if you're not an MSP. And it's going to be very much tailored to what it is that it's important for you to look at. So now I just have to figure out how to write that down. Oh yeah, for public Hudu. Um, Situation where you need access to that data. Rethinking as you collect feedback. Um, a lot of the documentation standards will be very specific. All right, and hopefully Hudu lets me save this. I'm just gonna copy it first, just in case. There we go. And that's basically it. We haven't received any new questions since the MA started. For the most part, we've answered every question that has come in the week leading up to, or a couple days leading up to it. And we're about 10 minutes left. So I think I may need to refresh. Are there more questions? Okay. What did I miss? This guy's done, right? That guy's done. This guy's done. This guy's done. This guy's done. That guy's done. 7 hours ago. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so one more question about recommended or favorite automation PowerShell scripts that have helped your team. Salvador, where they took all their magic dashes and also put them in a global company and thought that'd be useful. Just looking for some ideas that could be helpful to implement. Yeah, so this is similar to the other question regarding Roost and like cool automations that I've seen or whatever. For the most part, I can just copy paste that answer, but honestly, I don't really want to. There's another website. Let's just close out some of these things here. Let's just close them all out. Who cares? We can start over if we need to. All right. So Cybertrain has a blog that talks about how to do documentation, like automating documentation with PowerShell. A lot of it ties to IT-Glue, but with the IT-Glue, with the Hudu API PowerShell module, you can repurpose a lot of what he talks about for Hudu. And in fact, there was another website mentioned on the post earlier, mspp.io, which basically has done that as well. And so there's a folder here for Hudu. It's got a bunch of documents, a bunch of automations here that has been set up, where a lot of it came from Cyberdrain, and he's basically redone it, but mostly focuses around inventory automation. If you are collecting like site access details or whatever from your client, things like that, you can push your client to fill out forms that collect the information, automatically bring it into Hudu or whatever. That's from using Roost instead of PowerShell necessarily. There's oftentimes, especially in today's day and age, you'll get potentially a request for compliance self-assessment, and in those cases, the self-assessment can take quite a while to answer, but a lot of times they're asking for the same information. So like what we've done before is we've created a Hudu asset layout that basically was for the self-assessment. And we put every question that would come in from any kind of self-assessment into the Hudu layout. And then per client, as we'd get a self-assessment, we'd answer the assessment, but then we'd go to Hudu, we'd document those answers with those questions that are being asked for each client. And so the next time that assessment would come up, we would just pull up the asset layout and we'd just be able to compare it against the assessment to say like, what's changed, what's still being asked. Let's go ahead and easily fill it in. And we basically turned those self-assessments around from taking multiple hours to answer to essentially 10, 15 minutes. Not really an automation thing, though the next step after that would be to automate the process of running that self-assessment on a regular basis, asking those questions, using Roost or PowerShell to identify what those answers are and populating Hudu automatically, so that when the self-assessment comes up, we could just go to Hudu, screenshot or print it out or whatever and send it back and be like, here you go, here's all the evidence. So there's some cool things around that. Again, process stuff is nice because it allows you to show real-time progress of the process. So any kind of automation you can do with that in terms of completion and ongoing progress while giving the public link back to the client would be really nice. But yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just a matter of getting all that back into the text form of the answer. A lot of those, apparently I can't type scripts from Kelvin, posting them on his website. Let's put this as well. Yeah. All right, and that's basically done. We can refresh one more time and just see if we've got any other questions that popped up. Doesn't look like it. Looks like we've answered everything at this point. And we are at the top of the hour, more or less. So I will end the AMA at this point, and recording will be posted at some point over the on the YouTube channel. Thanks for coming and watching and attending the AMA.